The holiday of Purim was established in the days of the Persian Empire. At the time, most of the Jewish people were still living in exile in the Babylonian region, even though the temple was being rebuilt in Jerusalem and the Jewish people were allowed to return to Israel. But life was hard in Israel. The land had been allowed to go back to a wild state, and the people who were then living in the land were hostile to the Jews who returned. In contrast, life in the Persian Empire was good. Laws were fair and just. Trade was well regulated. Currency was uniform. There was even a government-run postal system. The capital city was filled with people from all ethnic origins. It was the ideal melting pot. Yet it was out of this time of relative peace and safety that one of the greatest threats to Judaism arose. I'm Brenda Cathcart, and this is Shadows of the Messiah. The threat to the Jewish people came from an insignificant public official, Haman the Agagite, who unexpectedly rose to power. Esther 3:1. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes who were with him. Haman thoroughly enjoyed his new position and liked it best when all the lesser officials bowed to him. There was one official, however, who wouldn't play the game. Mordecai the Jew refused to bow to Haman. Esther 3:2. And all the king's servants who were within the king's gate bowed and paid homage to Haman, for so the king had commanded concerning him. But Mordecai would not bow or pay homage. Haman took his hatred for Mordecai out against all the Jews. Esther 3:6. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him of the people of Mordecai. Instead, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, the people of Mordecai. Haman slandered the Jewish people to King Ahasuerus, claiming that they did not keep the laws of the Persian Empire and therefore deserved to be destroyed. Haman was able to convince the king to give him authority to sign an edict, not just allowing, but requiring the death of all the Jews in the Persian kingdom. Esther 3:12. Then the king's scribes were called on the 13th day of the first month, and a decree was written according to all that Haman commanded, to the king's satraps, to the governors who were over each province, to the officials of all people, to every province according to its script, and to every people in their language. In the name of King Ahasuerus it was written and sealed with the king's signet ring. The decree was signed on the 13th day of the first month. This is just one day before the Jewish people celebrate Passover in remembrance that God delivered them out of the hands of Pharaoh. Through a series of seeming coincidences, Mordecai and his niece Esther were able to thwart the attempt to kill the Jewish people. This is not the first time, nor will it be the last time, that the Jewish people have been hated simply because they chose to worship God. In fact, the first time a nation comes against Israel with the intent to wipe them out is when God first brings them out of Egypt. On their road to the Promised Land, they were confronted by the Amalekites. Haman just happens to be a descendant of the Amalekites. We read that Haman was an Agagite. That is, he is a descendant of Agag. Agag is the king of the Amalekites that King Saul defeated. 1 Samuel 15:7 and 8. And Saul attacked the Amalekites from Havilah all the way to Shur, which is east of Egypt. He also took Agag, king of the Amalekites, alive and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. Samuel ends up killing Agag, but the Midrash is told in the Talmud that Agag's pregnant wife escaped to bear a son who became the forefather of Haman. Let's look at the situation when the Amalekites first came against the children of Israel. The children of Israel had been on their journey to the Promised Land for just over a month. God had just started providing them with manna to eat the week before. Now they are in Rephidim and they have no water. They begin to grumble and complain. But God answered their need for water by having Moses strike the rock, and as a result, water poured out from the rock. God miraculously met their need. Now they had a steady source of both food and water. But before they could resume their journey, Amalek struck. Exodus 17, 8 and 9. Now Amalek came and fought with Israel in Rephidim. And Moses said to Joshua, "Choose us some men and go out, fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand." Moses chose Joshua to lead the troops in battle against Amalek. This is Joshua's first battle. He led the troops to victory over Amalek, but he didn't do it alone. Moses stood at the top of the hill with the rod of God raised up high. The rod he used was the one he had at the burning bush that God turned into a serpent as a sign to his fellow Hebrews that God had sent him. Exodus 4, 1 through 4. Then Moses answered and said, "But suppose they will not believe me or listen to my voice. Suppose they say, 'The Lord has not appeared to you.'" So the Lord said to him, "What is that in your hand?" He said, "A rod." And he said, "Cast it on the ground." So he cast it on the ground, and it became a serpent, and Moses fled from it. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Reach out your hand and take it by the tail." And he reached out his hand and caught it, and it became a rod in his hand. Moses took the rod with him when he set out for Egypt to use to perform the signs that God had given him to convince his fellow Hebrews. Exodus 4:20. Then Moses took his wife and his sons and set them on a donkey, and he returned to the land of Egypt. And Moses took the rod of God in his hand. What then did this rod represent? We see that its first appearance is as a witness that God was with Moses, and that God had sent Moses. Later, Moses uses this same rod to strike the rock out of which poured an abundance of water for the people. Now we see it in Moses' hand as the battle against Amalek rages. When Moses held the rod up, the children of Israel prevailed. When Moses' arms became heavy and the rod drooped, the Amalekites prevailed. Exodus 17, 11 through 13. And so it was when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed, and when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands became heavy, so they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. And Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one on one side and the other on the other side. And his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. So Joshua defeated Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. The rod was a symbol of God's presence with them and of his authority. It was a sign of God's power and sovereignty. Victory was in the hands of God. It was not Joshua's victory, although he played a part. The victory also belonged to Moses, who held the rod, and to Aaron and Hur, who held Moses' hands up when they grow weary. It also belonged to the soldiers who fought on throughout the entire day. Mostly it belonged to God, who brought the victory. After the battle, God told Moses that this battle was extremely significant. Moses was to record that battle and the name of their adversary in the book that he was writing. Then he was to read it to Joshua, so Joshua would know it was in the book. They were to remember this battle because they would battle against Amalek again and again in every generation until God wiped out the name of Amalek. Exodus 17, 14 through 16. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Write this for a memorial in the book and recount it in the hearing of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven." And Moses built an altar and called its name, "The Lord is my banner." For he said, "Because the Lord has sworn, the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation." Amalek came up seemingly out of nowhere just when things were looking good. As we look, though, at the attitude of the people at this time, we see that they were complaining and discontent. They were focused not on God, but on themselves. They had already forgotten the power of God when he brought them out of Egypt. They had forgotten the power of God when he divided the waters of the Red Sea. They had forgotten the compassion of God when He just the previous week provided manna for them to eat. The situation in Persia was similar to this. The Jewish people thought things were looking good. They had houses, wealth, and position in Persia. Our hero Mordecai had been hiding the fact that he was Jewish. His niece Esther had not told anyone, not even her husband the king, that she was Jewish. Then along came Haman, descendant of Amalek, reminding them that God is the one who provides for them and brings the victory. After Joshua defeated Amalek, Moses built an altar and called it Jehovah Nissi, the Lord is my banner. The word for banner is number 5251 in the Strong's Lexicon. Nace, meaning a flag, also a sail, generally a signal, figuratively a token, banner, pole, ensign, standard. It is from a word meaning to see from afar. There's an interesting word picture in the letters of the word nace. In the Hebrew alphabet, each letter is also a picture in a word. The letter nun is a fish darting through water, symbolizing life. The samach is a prop or support. The word picture then for nace is the banner that supports life. This is not a name for God, but a name for the altar. The name for this altar reminds us that God is my banner. He is the support of my life. 40 years after the defeat of Amalek, when the children of Israel are finally ready to enter the promised land, Moses reminds them of their earlier encounter with Amalek. Deuteronomy 25:17 through 19. Remember what Amalek did to you on the way as you were coming out of Egypt, how he met you on the way and attacked your rear ranks, all the stragglers at your rear, when you were tired and weary, and he did not fear God. Therefore it shall be when the Lord your God has given you rest from your enemies all around, in the land which the Lord your God is giving you to possess as an inheritance, that you will blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. You shall not forget. Amalek attacked the weak, the weary, the tired, and the vulnerable. He attacked when they were distracted by their challenges and focused on their own problems. When Amalek observed their behavior towards God, he had no fear of God. But when the rod of God is raised high, when we focus on the one with the power and authority, our enemies will know to fear God, and we will realize the victory. We will have rest from our enemies. After the Jewish people successfully fought off Haman and his allies, Mordecai and Esther established a yearly celebration to celebrate the days that God gave them rest from their enemies. Esther 9:20 through 22. And Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters to all the Jews near and far who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, to establish among them that they should celebrate yearly the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar, as the days on which the Jews had rest from their enemies, as the month which was turned from sorrow to joy for them, and from mourning to a holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and joy, of sending presents to one another and gifts to the poor. Notice that their focus is turned outwards on these days of celebration. They are not to focus on themselves or on their own trials, but on blessing others who are in need. They are to rejoice that in every generation God will give the victory over their enemies. Even when it seems that the enemies have an insurmountable advantage, God will turn it around. When the Jewish people celebrate Purim today, they do so by giving to the poor. This is considered a commandment. Second, they read the scroll of Esther, cheering for Mordecai and Esther while booing Haman. They celebrate joyously that God acted behind the scenes to bring deliverance to the Jewish people. The holiday of Purim is called Purim because when Haman cast the lot, or pur, to determine when to annihilate the Jews, God turned it around and caused the annihilation of Haman. Esther 9:24 through 26a. Because Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to annihilate them, and had cast pur, that is the lot, to consume them and destroy them. But when Esther came before the king, he commanded by letter that this wicked plot which Haman had devised against the Jews should return on his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. So they called these days Purim, after the name Pur. Each generation, God's people will be faced with an Amalek, with someone or some group of people that hate them just because they are God's people. Yeshua said, "We are blessed when others hate us for his name's sake." Matthew 5:11. "Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake." There will be a day when the rod of God is once again lifted over the peoples, when God's people will look up and see that God is with them and he brings the victory. Isaiah 11:10. "And in that day there shall be a root of Jesse, who shall stand as a banner to the people, for the Gentiles shall seek him, and his resting place shall be glorious." On that day when the nations gather to destroy God's people, all those who worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, God will turn their supposedly sure victory into defeat. God's people will enter into his rest. The lesson of Purim is that God is present even when we don't see him. We are to keep our eyes on God and on his banner. He is the one with power and authority. God is the one who will confound all our enemies, and he is the one who gives us rest. Thanks for watching today. I'm Brenda Cathcart, and this is Shadows of the Messiah. Shalom and be blessed.
Thank you for watching today's video presentation. Brenda and I invite you to visit our website at moedministries.com, where you will find some valuable free resources for you to share with your family and neighbors. On our teaching ministry page, you will find links to materials for use in small home group Bible studies, such as our 4-volume Shadows of the Messiah in the Torah series. Also available is Divine Appointments with God, an in-depth study of the feasts of the Lord. We have recorded free video sessions available on our website at the Feast Study tab to supplement the Leader's Guide and companion student workbooks available in our online bookstore. Both the Shadows of Messiah in the Torah and the Divine Appointments with God make great family, small group, or even individual Bible studies. Several of our other books and videos are also available in our bookstore, so please visit our website today at moedministries.com. That's Moed, M-O-E-D, Ministries, all one word, .com. And be sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. Again, thanks for watching today. Shalom and be blessed.